Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're going to be exploring Brené Brown's Dare to Lead. I know you're interested in this book to glean some leadership insights.
Yeah, it's a great book for that.
I'm really intrigued by Brown's approach.
Yeah.
Because she kind of turns a lot of the traditional ideas we have about leadership on their head.
Yeah, she really does. You're right. Her research really highlights how vulnerability and authenticity those are at the core of great leadership.
And I feel like that can be so counterintuitive, especially when we think about like that image of like this, stoic, always in control leader that we often see.
It's so true. It really goes against the grain of what we've come to expect from leaders.
So how does Brown actually redefine leadership then?
Well, she argues that true leadership, it's not actually about control. It's about courage.
Yeah.
It's about the willingness to step up and be seen, especially when things are uncertain or when things are difficult.
Okay.
And one of the key things that she emphasizes is that great leaders, they create environments where people feel safe to be themselves, to take risks, to be vulnerable.
Yeah, makes sense.
Yeah.
Because if you don't feel safe, you're probably not going to share your ideas or speak up when you see a problem.
Exactly. You're going to hold back. You're not going to be fully engaged.
Yeah.
And so that's where her concept of armored leadership versus daring leadership comes in.
Can you explain those two approaches to me and our listeners?
Sure. So armored leadership, it's all about self-protection.
Okay.
It's rooted in fear. It's about needing to always be right, to have control, to avoid vulnerability at all costs.
Right.
So leaders who operate from this kind of mindset, they tend to be really closed off. They avoid feedback.
Okay.
They really struggle to connect with their teams authentically.
Got it. So they're kind of like putting up walls almost, like protecting themselves.
Yeah, exactly. They're constantly on guard. They're not really open to new ideas or perspectives.
Yeah.
On the other hand, daring leadership. This is about leading with an open heart. It's about embracing vulnerability as a strength and creating a space where others feel safe to do the same.
So instead of like shielding themselves and their teams from discomfort,
Yeah.
daring leaders actually like lean into those tough conversations.
Exactly. They're willing to have those difficult conversations.
Yeah.
They recognize that you can't really build trust or foster creativity without vulnerability.
And you're not going to have any innovation if you're not willing to be a little bit vulnerable and put yourself out there.
Exactly. It's all about taking risks and being okay with not having all the answers.
This reminds me of something that really struck me while reading the book. Brown talks about how vulnerability is often mistaken for weakness. But she argues it's actually the key to driving positive change.
Absolutely. It's like that saying, you can't make an omelet without breaking a few eggs.
Right.
You have to be willing to shake things up, to step outside of your comfort zone
Yeah.
if you want to see real progress.
And when leaders model that vulnerability, it gives other people permission to do the same.
Exactly. It creates this ripple effect. It becomes part of the culture.
That makes sense. Have you ever been in a work environment where that vulnerability wasn't valued?
Oh, yeah. I think most of us have experienced that at some point.
Where it felt like everyone was trying to prove themselves and hide their imperfections.
Yeah. It's like this constant pressure to be perfect.
Right.
And it's exhausting. It really stifles creativity and innovation.
It's like the difference between a plant trying to grow in a dark, cramped space
Yeah.
versus one thriving in the open sunlight.
That's such a great analogy. It really captures the essence of it.
It's like that fear of vulnerability can really suffocate the creativity and growth of a team or an organization.
Totally. It prevents people from bringing their whole selves to work. And when that happens, everyone loses out.
So what can we do then to cultivate more of this daring leadership, both in ourselves and in the environments we're a part of?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
Right.
And I think one of the first steps is just becoming aware of our own tendencies toward armored leadership. Noticing those moments when we're shying away from vulnerability.
Like avoiding those difficult conversations.
Yeah. Or pretending we have all the answers.
Or not sharing our true thoughts and feelings.
Right. Exactly. All
Yeah.
of those things.
Okay.
And then it's about making a conscious choice to show up differently, to embrace courage over comfort.
Lead with our whole hearts, even when it feels scary.
Even when it feels really uncomfortable.
Yeah. Which leads us perfectly to part 2 of the book, where Brown talks about rumbling with vulnerability.
That's a good one.
And I'll admit, when I first heard that phrase, it sounded a little intimidating.
Yeah, it does have a certain intensity to it.
It does. Can you explain what Brown actually means by rumbling?
So it's not about conflict or aggression.
Okay.
A rumble, in Brown's terms, it's a deep, honest conversation where you're willing to get real about your fears, your concerns, even your doubts.
So it's about having those tough conversations that most people try to avoid.
Exactly. It's about leaning into the discomfort
Yeah.
and creating a space where people feel safe to share their authentic perspectives.
Even when those perspectives might be different from our own.
Yes, even when they challenge our own beliefs.
So how does this idea of rumbling actually play out in a leadership context then?
Well, Brown believes that leaders should not only be willing to rumble themselves, but also actively create a culture where rumbling is welcomed and encouraged.
So they need to model this type of open communication.
Exactly. Lead by example.
Yeah.
And create an environment where people feel safe to disagree, to offer constructive feedback, to raise concerns without fear of judgment or reprisal.
That sounds ideal, but also incredibly challenging to actually achieve.
Oh, it definitely takes effort. It's not easy.
So where do you even begin to cultivate that kind of openness and trust within a team or an organization?
Well, I think it starts with the leader being willing to embrace vulnerability themselves.
Okay.
Showing their team that it's okay to not have all the answers.
So it's about shifting the focus from being right to learning and growing together.
Exactly. It's about creating a culture of continuous learning and improvement.
And that brings us to another key point Brown makes: the importance of living in alignment with our values.
That's a big one.
This idea really resonated with me. Can you tell us more about it?
Yeah, it's about more than just saying we value things like honesty or integrity.
Right. It's about actually demonstrating those values through our actions.
Yeah, walking the walk, not just talking the talk.
Even when it's hard.
Especially when it's hard.
Yeah.
Yeah, Brown has this great quote where she says, integrity is choosing courage over comfort. And I think that just really sums it up.
It's so true. It's about making those choices that are aligned with our principles, even when it would be easier to just compromise.
Exactly. And this is especially crucial for leaders. You know, when leaders make decisions that are consistent with their values, even when those decisions are unpopular or challenging, it just builds so much trust and respect within their teams.
Yeah, it sends that really powerful message that their words and actions are aligned.
Yeah, they're not just saying one thing and doing another. They're walking the walk.
This raises an interesting question for our listener. What are your top 2 values? And can you think of a time when you might have compromised those values? Maybe at work. How did that feel? It's a good thing to think about.
Yeah, it's really worth reflecting on because when we're not living in alignment with our values, it creates this sense of internal conflict, this dissonance.
Yeah, and that can impact not just our own well-being, but also our relationships and our effectiveness as leaders.
Absolutely. So living into our values, even when it's challenging, it's essential for building trust, both with ourselves and with the people around us.
And speaking of trust, that leads us right into part 4 of Dare Lead, where Brown introduces her braving acronym.
Oh, yes, braving.
I was fascinated by this when I read it. Can you break down this acronym for us?
Sure. So braving stands for boundaries, reliability, accountability, vault, integrity, non-judgment, and generosity.
A lot to unpack there.
I know, right? But these are the 7 elements that Brown identifies as the essential building blocks of trust.
So it's not enough to just say, I trust you, or I want to build trust with you.
Right. It's more than just words. It's about actions.
There are specific actions and behaviors that we need to demonstrate to really cultivate that foundation of trust.
Exactly. Trust isn't just this feeling. It's something that's earned through consistent actions over time.
So let's break it down, starting with boundaries. What does Brown mean by that in the context of trust?
So boundaries are about setting clear expectations and limits. It's knowing what you're willing to tolerate and what you're not, and communicating that clearly to others.
So it's about being upfront about your needs and expectations,
Yeah.
and not being afraid to say no when you need to.
Exactly. And when people have healthy boundaries, they feel safer and more respected in relationships.
Because they know where they stand with you, and they don't have to constantly guess or worry about overstepping.
Right. It just makes things so much clearer,
Yeah.
and it helps to prevent misunderstandings and resentment down the road.
That makes sense.
Oh.
Okay, so the next element of braving is reliability.
Yes. Reliability.
And this one seems pretty straightforward.
Yeah. It's about doing what you say you're going to do consistently.
Showing up when you say you will.
Exactly. People need to be able to count on you. If you're always making promises you can't keep or you're constantly flaking on commitments, it just erodes trust.
Yeah, it makes it hard for people to feel confident in you and your ability to actually follow through.
Right. Reliability is about proving that you can be trusted to do what you say you'll do.
Okay, makes sense.
Yeah.
Next, we have accountability, which I imagine is about taking responsibility for our actions.
You got it. Accountability is about owning our mistakes, making amends when we mess up, and learning from those experiences.
And this is where that vulnerability piece comes back in, right? Being able to admit when we're wrong and take responsibility for our actions.
Absolutely. Accountability requires vulnerability. It requires us to acknowledge our imperfections and to step up and make things right when we've made a mistake.
Having the courage to say, hey, I screwed up, and I'm going to do what I can to fix it.
Exactly. It's about taking ownership.
Okay, now, vault. This one maybe seems a little less obvious in how it relates to trust.
Yeah, it's not as immediately clear as some of the others.
It makes me think of secrets or confidential information. Yeah. How does that tie into trust?
So vault refers to respecting the confidentiality of others and not sharing information that's been entrusted to you.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So it's about being someone that other people feel safe confiding in.
Exactly. Knowing that you won't betray their trust by gossiping or spreading sensitive information.
And that allows for more open and honest communication because they know they can share their thoughts and feelings without fear of judgment or repercussions.
Right. It creates that sense of safety and security, which is so essential for building strong, healthy relationships.
Okay, so next we have integrity, which we already touched on a bit earlier.
Right. Integrity.
It's about lining our actions with our values.
Exactly. It's about walking the walk, not just talking the talk. People can tell when your words and actions don't match up.
Yeah, it creates that sense of dissonance. And it makes it hard to believe anything you say.
Right. So integrity is about being congruent in our words and actions and making choices that reflect our core values, even when it's tough.
Okay, on to non-judgment, which I think of as creating that safe space for people to just be themselves.
You got it. Non-judgment is about fostering an environment where people feel comfortable sharing their struggles, asking for help, expressing their true selves without fear of being judged or shamed.
It makes me think of that rumbling with vulnerability idea. It's about creating that sense of psychological safety.
Exactly, where people feel seen, heard, and accepted for who they are.
And finally, we have generosity, which I associate with kindness and compassion. How does generosity relate to trust?
So generosity in this context, it's about assuming the best in others and giving them the benefit of the doubt. It's about approaching our interactions with a spirit of kindness and understanding, even when someone makes a mistake or disappoints us.
It's about choosing to see the best in people, even when they mess up.
Right. Recognizing that we all make mistakes.
And we all have areas where we're still growing and learning.
Exactly. And offering grace and compassion instead of jumping to conclusions or assigning blame.
And that generosity can really go a long way in building and maintaining trust in those relationships.
It can really make all the difference.
I love this braving acronym. It just provides such a concrete framework for both understanding and building trust.
It's so helpful, right?
It takes this complex concept and breaks it down into these 7 tangible elements that we can all work on individually and collectively.
It's a great tool for self-reflection and also for looking at our teams and organizations.
Thinking about which of these elements are strongest in your workplace and which ones might need a little more attention.
Yeah, that's a good question to ask.
And that leads us perfectly into part 5 of the book, where Brown focuses on learning to rise. This is the section that really resonated with me. Her emphasis on resilience and this ability to bounce back from setbacks.
Right.
I think that's so crucial, especially in today's world.
Yeah, it really is. It feels like things are changing so fast these days, and you really have to be able to adapt.
How does Brown approach this whole idea of learning to rise, though? Especially in the context of leadership.
Well, she emphasizes that resilience. It's not about avoiding failure. You know, it's not about never messing up.
Right. It's not about being perfect.
Exactly. It's about how we respond to those setbacks and challenges.
So it's not about never falling down.
Yeah.
It's about having the strength and courage to get back up.
Exactly. And Brown actually points out that all great leaders, you know, they've all faced failures. They've faced challenges.
Right. Nobody gets through life unscathed.
Right. Nobody's perfect. And what sets those great leaders apart is their ability to actually learn from those experiences and come back even stronger.
So they don't let those setbacks define them.
No. They see them as opportunities for growth.
Which requires a lot of vulnerability.
It does. It requires you to allow yourself to actually feel those difficult emotions. The disappointment, the hurt.
But not getting stuck there.
Right. Not letting it consume you.
And I think this is where leadership comes in again. Leaders have a responsibility to model that resilience for their teams.
Absolutely. They need to show their team that it's okay to make mistakes. You know, that failure is part of the process.
It's part of learning and growing.
Exactly. And that it's possible to bounce back and actually grow from those experiences.
This makes me think about the culture of an organization. Like, how does the actual workplace environment either support or hinder that kind of resilient mindset?
It's so important. Think about your own workplace. Does it punish mistakes or does it embrace them as learning opportunities?
Is there space for open and honest feedback?
Yeah.
Do people feel safe to take risks and try new things, even if they might not succeed?
All of those factors, they contribute to a culture of
And
resilience.
it sounds like creating that kind of environment, it requires a real shift in mindset,
Yeah, it's a big shift.
moving away from that fear of failure
Yeah.
to more of a focus on growth and learning.
It's about embracing the learning process.
As we wrap up this deep dive into Dare to Lead, what would you say is Brown's overarching message to us?
I think it's a call to courage.
A call to action.
Yeah, a call to embrace vulnerability, empathy, and trust as those core principles of leadership.
It's a call to show up authentically,
Yeah.
connect with others on a deeper level, and build relationships based on genuine care and respect.
And lead with our whole hearts.
And no matter what role we play, whether it's at work or in our families, in our communities, these principles can make a real difference.
They really can. They can help us create more fulfilling, more meaningful experiences.
For ourselves and for the people around us.
Yeah, it's about creating a better world.
So to our listener who's been exploring Dare to Lead with us today, what's one key takeaway that you hope they'll walk away with?
I think the most important thing to remember is that true leadership, it's not about power or control. It's about fostering connection,
Yeah,
courage, and vulnerability.
those are the things that really matter.
Yes.
Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into Dare to Lead. It's been a pleasure exploring this book with you.
It's been great talking about this with you.
And to our listener,
Yeah.
until next time, keep daring to lead.